Hello, my name is Michael Arnold. I am here with EDS 206, and I'm going to discuss the leading in article that we read outside of class and discussed in class. Just briefly, I think the overarching theme of the article is that as teachers, we really want our kids to be critical thinkers in the classroom and in life. And so I think it should be right as for us as teachers to also be critical thinkers. And this is something that's maybe lacking a little bit in the educational society as well as society in general nowadays. And so I think that's something that this article is really trying to hit on. It does so over 5 guidelines, and starting with the first guideline, it talks about intellectual humility. And it really talks about just the concept that we have to admit that we really don't know everything as students, and we have to be willing to surrender to the fact that maybe we do need help, maybe we don't understand everything, maybe we should be a little bit more critical when we think about what exactly we're going over and what it means. And it brings us to guideline 2, which ultimately is when we're thinking when we're using our intellectual humility on our assignments, we need to know the difference between facts and opinions. So it would only make sense for me, if I'm being intellectually humble, that I check my opinions off and realize that just because I think something is true doesn't maybe mean it's actually true. So that's something that's really important in the classroom and in society as we go forward as a society. So if we have those two things, the intellectual humility and the ability to distinguish between facts, it really brings us to the third guideline, which is that we need to stop focusing on just our experiences or the anecdotal evidence, and we need to start zooming out and looking at the trends we see in culture today. So, for example, the author states that one exception to the matter does not mean that something is definitely not true. So it used the example of, people can't simply just state because President Obama is president that African American men in this country don't have an equal opportunity. That would just be naive as us to believe, and that would be copping out of the very real realities of what lies underneath the chances that an African American man has compared to a white man, for that matter. So we really need to check out of those things, zoom out, don't just focus on our own opinions. We need to really look at what is the evidence that we see all across society, not just in our own lives. And brings us to guideline 4. So pretty much this goes into our reactions, what we tend to feel in the class, and what that means for us. So I think it's really important, and this article outlines that we really need to sort of, look inside of ourselves when we feel those intense reactions and wonder why exactly that is, because oftentimes I feel like we feel these things most when it's just a very subtle truth in our own lives. So, for example, if someone came up to me and told me, like, hey man, you're a jerk to everyone and I think you should stop doing it, I would probably disregard that and it probably wouldn't bother me much, because I try to hold myself to a standard where I do treat everybody with respect. And if someone just told me that for no reason, it wouldn't bother me, because I know that I don't treat everyone as a jerk, for example. But now, on the other hand, if someone came up to me and said, hey, I noticed that you tend to not care how your opinions make other people feel sometimes, I probably would get really defensive. Because it's a very subtle truth that lies within me. And what would be bad for me to do in that situation is to run away from those feelings and run away from why I'm actually getting defensive. Rather, I would need to look into my defensive nature and wonder, am I getting defensive of this because deep down I know that it's partially true? And so that's not a great example for every situation, but it is somewhat of an example that just because we feel these negative emotions doesn't mean we should turn them off. We should often ask ourselves why we are feeling these negative emotions. And, using those thoughts and those feelings, we can actually further dictate our emotions to actually bring about a better effect in the classroom and in society. Guideline 5 brings us to notice where exactly we stand in society, and notice that just because, for example, if I'm a white male, I'm not going to be able to notice the separations from chances that African American males get. So I really need to be aware of where exactly am I coming from, and how is that going to further blind me to seeing what they see, if that makes sense. And so I think for me, if you were to ask me what I push back on in this article, it's really difficult for me to find something to push back on, because I think the author does a really good job of representing her opinions in this paper. And but if I had to pick one, it would be the letting go of your anecdotal evidence in Guideline 3, because I think it's kind of dangerous when you start walking down the road of telling people not to, think of their opinions as valid. And ultimately, I don't think that's what the author is getting at, but I could see how maybe you could kind of twist her words into interpreting it that way. Now, also, the anecdotal evidence is the thing that's probably hardest for me to go with. It's really difficult for me to personally check my own opinions out as not good enough. And I admit that because as a human, I like to think that I'm always right. I like to think those things. And personally, like, for example, when it comes to like police brutality in this nation, it's hard for me to realize those things because I come from a town where that didn't happen much. And so I really have to just work on, kind of being able to actually see other people's point of views as valid and not just my own. And two personal things that I can do to kind of meet the things that this article, which is very challenging, the two things that I can do to kind of meet that is actually like leaning into my own uncomfortable areas, as the title suggests, leaning in, because sometimes the best way that we can jump into a pool theoretically is just to jump right in. It's not to inch our way in. And it would just be really naive of me to believe that there's ever going to become a day where cross-cultural interactions between people is ever going to be easy. It's simply not. And so as future teachers in this society, it's important that we really take the bull by the horns and choose to make a difference even when it can be uncomfortable, because there never will be a day that it's just easy and convenient for us to do unless we physically do something about it. And that's something that I definitely can work on, and I'm excited to work on it. One more thing would just be to take time in my personal life to connect with people cross-culturally, because I can't reasonably expect as a future educator that I can just walk into the classroom and be effective with my students engaging cross-culturally if I don't have any practice with it, or if I don't live that out in my own life. So that would be an area of mine, two areas of mine that I could work on. And I expect to become better at that throughout this class and throughout even reading articles such as Leaning In. And I thought it was an excellent article, and I'm looking forward to see how it impacts us.